Okay, at the top of the show, we spelled out the case that the Democrats are making and also showed you how President Trump and his supporters continue to remain in denial about this. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to open up our lines here. I know a lot of you waiting patiently. I promise to get to those calls here. Toll-free number, the question on your screen. Let's, though, bring in our guest right now. He is one of the 17 Watergate prosecutors who recently penned a piece in the Washington Post saying Trump ought to be impeached. Now, before we get to him, I want to play what Adam Schiff just said in his closing statements just a couple hours ago, where he evoked none other than Watergate.
The other defense is the president denies it. Well, I guess that's case closed, right? The president says, really quite spontaneously, it's not as if he was asked in this way, no quid pro quo. What do you want from Ukraine? No quid pro quo. This is the I'm not a crook defense. You say it, and I guess that's the end of it. What we've seen here is far more serious than a third-rate burglary of the Democratic headquarters. What we're talking about here is the withholding of recognition in that White House meeting, the withholding of military aid to an ally at war. That is beyond anything Nixon did.
Well, let's see what our guest thinks. Richard Davis joins us, I mentioned, a former prosecutor in Watergate, and he's also former Assistant Secretary of Treasury. Richard, do you agree? From what you dealt with in Watergate to what we're dealing with now, the consequences and the alleged offenses are more serious today than then?
Look, Watergate was serious. It was more than a break-in. It was using, for example, people operating out of the White House to break into the office of the psychiatrist of a political opponent. So that was very serious. But here you have something that has more repercussions, because in how we're conducting ourselves, in undermining an ally, in using the American dollars in order to extort a political help in a campaign, it undermines our election system. But it also puts at risk an ally, withholding aid in that context. And I must say, withholding the meeting. The meeting also is significant because Ukraine, let's take a step back. Ukraine is under attack. Who do they need as their supporter? They need the United States of America. If they're to stand up to Russia, whether it be on the battlefield or in the negotiating table, Russia has to know that we have Ukraine's back. And the way you show that is by giving the military aid, but it's also by having this meeting in the White House and having the president put his arm around the new president and saying, we're with you. That also was being denied until there were these political acts that were being asked for. Investigation looking back at 2016 to try and divert attention from Russia and put it on blame on Ukraine, and investigation into the political opponent, Joe Biden and his son.
Richard, from Sondland, as I mentioned off the top, he said quid pro quo, that President wanted something in return for something. He also said here that this came directly from the president. This was from the top. But he also said, this is no regular channels. Everybody was in the loop. And to that end, former White House ethics attorney Richard Painter, he made a point that there's some people in the administration that ought to be nervous. And at the top of the list for me goes Secretary Pompeo, who's repeatedly by multiple witnesses saying that the secretary not only knew, he facilitated this. Moreover, you got also the chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, who not only said it live in a press conference, but also implicated in multiple testimonies that he was present and well aware of what was happening. Is there concerns for some of the president's men that exposure extends to them?
Well, I mean, I think the issue does extend to them. There's no question. I mean, as I think you referred to earlier in the program, Mick Mulvaney admitted it in words of one syllable and then blamed the reporters for reporting exactly the words he said when he admitted that there was, in a sense, a quid pro quo. He didn't like to use those words. He said, oh, it was just that they wanted to do this investigation into the 2016 campaign to blame the Ukrainians, and that's why they withheld the aid. Secretary of State Pompeo, I mean, I think this has been a two-pronged bad week for him, or bad 2 weeks. One, his failure to defend his own department. allowing the ambassador to be recalled in such a humiliating way, not defending her publicly, that undermines the ability of our foreign service to do their job. But now with Ambassador Sondland saying, not surprising, he said, I wasn't the Lone Ranger. I was operating with instructions and under the direction of everybody. Secretary of State Pompeo, the president, and he also referred to John Bolton. I think Fiona Hill sort of made the real point today. She said, I was unfair in criticizing him before when I said he was off on his own tangent. He was just on a different mission. My mission was national security. His mission, which he was given by all these people, was politics. And that's what we saw here.
And Richard, let me ask you two things from an evidentiary standpoint and also from a strategy standpoint. It seems to be a foregone conclusion, not my opinion, but even the White House's and Republicans in the Senate, that the president will be impeached in the House, whether it be 1, 2, or 3 articles. There's going to be an impeachment when it comes to a floor vote. And as we said before, all they need is plurality for the House. Now, when it gets to the Senate, we're hearing reports that there's not enough Republican votes right now to dismiss it out of hand. That means at least 4 Republican senators have said, no way, we need a trial. The trial apparently would be at least 2 weeks in length. Now, the Democrats have a choice to make right now. Given some of the testimony, they might want to hear from additional witnesses. They may want to issue subpoenas and compel testimony. They may want to push for more evidence. I can think off the top of my head, how about the unredacted version of that actual conversation with Zelensky and Trump? How about getting some clarity from the High Court on these tax returns? Who knows where that could lead? But the clock's their enemy. If you're the Dems, the Judiciary Committee is supposed to have their crack at this thing too before it would go to the Senate. How do you play some of the missing elements right now, and maybe missing witnesses like John Bolton, against the reality that 2020 is an election year? And you got to keep that in mind, that you're not seen as an obstructionary arm here doing this for political gain.
Look, I think you have to set priorities. I don't think you can spend months and months and months litigating. But there is one priority which I think comes to the top of the list, and that's John Bolton. Just based on Fiona Hill's testimony, what we've heard, things that he even said in some recent speech where he talked about that the president was really more interested in his financial interests than in public policy. I think that it's worth some delay to see if you could get John Bolton's testimony. And why do I say that? One, on the merits, because obviously I think that would be important testimony. He's quoted as referring to this as a drug deal. But second, politically, because I'm not under the illusion that you're going to get 20 Republican senators, but if John Bolton did testify, consistent with the way Fiona Hill testified, if you got 4, if you got 5, if you got 6 Republican senators, that would send an important message that this, to the American public, that there is people, not just Democrats, looking at that and being horrified. And I must say there are a lot of Republicans who are horrified. They just don't happen to be elected Republicans. And it's the people who are in office that seem to be scared of the president. But John Bolton, he could provide cover for a certain number of them, which I think would be very important. Now, you can't wait forever for the reasons you said. It's an election year. The closer you get to the election, the better the argument is why you're removing somebody so close to an election. And second, obviously the Democrats are concerned with having the impeachment story overwhelm their primary process to select their own candidate.
Well, Richard, we're going to hear from some of those voices. We're going to get to our phone call straight ahead, but I certainly appreciate some context tonight. Richard Davis, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, everyone, as I mentioned, your voices next. Toll-free lines open right now. You know the question as well. Did anything you heard this week and last week with these impeachment hearings change your mind? We'll get to that reaction next.